welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It's Tuesday, and I am delighted to be with you once again, bringing you another episode and another author interview. I hope your week is off to a great start, and of course, I hope you had a great weekend. If you celebrated Mother's Day, as a mother, as a child, I hope that you had a wonderful day. I know it can be a complicated day for a lot of people, so whatever that day involved for you emotionally, I hope that you were surrounded by love in some form and, spent time with family, whether that's related family, chosen family, what have you. I hope the day was okay for you. I did talk to my mom on Sunday. I almost always talk to my mom on Sundays, but of course I would have called her on Mother's Day, but I do appreciate being able to talk to her every week, regardless of the fact that we live on separate continents now. And that actually comes up in today's conversation with the author, because the main character, the protagonist of this book, moves to the U.S. and her mother is still in Israel, but it's a different time. So I can call my mom very easily, or I can even have a video call with my mom and see her. And this is set in a time when it's not that easy. So that conversation comes up, but that's a little bit later. Anyway, very happy to be able to talk to my mom on Mother's Day. And and then the rest of the weekend, Saturday, spent the afternoon with a friend, the same friend who made my fabulous birthday cake. And for my birthday, she also gave me a paint your own mugs set, because there's two of them. They're very cute. They look like they're hugging. So it's a set. There's two. I already said that there's a set, there's two of them, and it just seemed appropriate that we paint them together. So Saturday, we spent the afternoon. I like to mash words together, so I like to call it a crafternoon. So we spent the crafternoon painting our mugs, and her husband made lunch, which was very sweet of him, and we went for a walk. Just very nice. Also managed to get some work done this weekend, so it was productive in a lot of ways. Not a bad weekend, can't complain. So I hope that your weekend went well, that your week is off to a great start. I forgot to do one thing as I started this episode, and that is to ask you to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Really does help the algorithm get the podcast out to more readers like yourselves. Also, if you want to help the podcast in another fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or a donation. If while you're there you would like to leave a question or a comment, I'm happy to engage with those. Love hearing from you. So let me know if you have questions or what you're thinking about any of the interviews that I do with the authors, who you've read, etc. But if you do want to help the podcast in a monetary fashion, not just the podcast, but the network as a whole, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. You see that in the video playing next to me, but it's also scrolling along the bottom of the screen throughout the episode. Thank you, as always, for every bit of support that you have in the past and continue to give this podcast. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. All right. Normally I do that at the more closer. Wow. More toward the beginning. Just forgot tonight. But let's talk about this week's book. I am speaking with author Zeeva Bukai about her book, The Anatomy of Exile. The description is as follows. In the wake of the 1967 Six-Day War, Tamar Abadis' world collapses when her sister-in-law is killed in what appears to be a terror attack, but what is really the result of a secret relationship with a Palestinian poet. Tamar's husband, Salim, is an Arab and a Jew. Torn between the two identities and mourning his sister's death, he uproots his family and moves them to the U.S. As Tamar struggles to maintain the integrity of the family's Jewish-Israeli identity against the backdrop of the American melting pot culture, a Palestinian family moves into the apartment upstairs, and she is forced to reckon with her narrow thinking as her daughter falls in love with the Palestinian son. Fearing history will repeat itself, Tamar's determination to separate the two sets into motion a series of events that have the power to destroy her relationship with her daughter, her marriage, and the family she has worked so hard to protect. This powerful debut novel explores Tamar's struggle to keep her family intact, to accept that love is taboo, and grapples with how exile forces us to reshape our identity in ways we could not imagine. So again, that is The Anatomy of Exile by Zeeva Bukai. It is what, I don't know if this is a real term. I doubt I made it up. I'm sure I must have heard it somewhere. I kind of think of it as contemporary historical fiction, meaning that it starts in 1967, it ends in 1973. So while it is in the past, it is in a different era, if you will. There's also people who are still alive, who were alive then and could tell you about this time period. So I kind of think of it as contemporary historical fiction. Again, probably just made that up, but it makes sense in my brain. If it makes sense to you, cool. But it really does deal with identity and family and so many issues of identity on so many different levels, and so many different levels of exile and what that means. So let's go ahead and let Zeeva explain more about all those different layers of identity and exile. Again, it's called The Anatomy of Exile. The author is Zeeva Bukai. Hi, Zeeva, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. I am excited to talk about your novel, The Anatomy of Exile. Before we do that, though, if you would take just a few moments to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Zeeva Bukai. I am a teacher, a writer. I'm also the assistant director of academic support at SUNY Empire State University. I live in the same building as my daughter and granddaughters, and as my youngest daughter as well. So I'm a mother of two and a grandmother of two. And let's see, what else? I live in Brooklyn, New York. I've been writing probably for the last, I'd say, 30 years seriously. Um, I like to make pottery and I love to sing and dance. And that's about it.
Okay, well, I love
Yeah,
it. I love that you live in the same building as your daughters. You can,
I know. We just moved in about a year or so ago, about a year and a half ago.
yeah,
We sold up the big house and kind of moved into a studio or a junior one bedroom, my husband and I. So it's a tight squeeze, but it's lovely having them down the hall, you know,
yes, but you still
little
have your
granddaughters.
separation. But yeah, that you
Exactly, exactly.
can see them when you want. Very nice. All right, so this is your debut novel, is that correct?
Yes, it is. This is
Wonderful.
my first novel. I have stories that I've published. People can find them linked on my website. But yes, this is my first novel that I've published. Not the first that I've written, but
Sure.
the first that I've published. Yes.
Yes, that's often the case. Can you give an overview of The Anatomy of Exile?
Sure. So, The Anatomy of Exile is about an Israeli family that leaves Israel to immigrate to the United States after the death of a beloved sister in what appears to be a terror attack, but is in fact a love affair that a love affair between an Israeli Jewish woman and a Palestinian Muslim man that ends tragically.
Yeah, yeah. And this takes place, it starts in the 60s. So
That's right.
yeah,
This takes place at the end of the Six Day War in 1967. The Six Day War was June 5th, 1967. It lasted for 6 days. This takes place probably a few weeks after that and ends in 1973 after the Yom Kippur Wars.
mhm,
These two wars kind of bookend the
yeah,
novel.
yeah, absolutely. What was your inspiration for the story?
So I was born in Israel. My family came here when I was about 3.5, almost 4 years old. And both my parents met in Israel, but each one of them were from different places. My father, like the protagonist's husband, Salim, in the novel, my father was also born in Damascus, Syria. My mother, on the other hand, was born in Siberia. at the start
Okay.
of the Second World War in 1940. Unlike my protagonist, Tamar, who is a full Sabra, meaning that she was born in Israel
Hmm.
and grew up there her whole life. So she has a very different attachment to Israel than Salim does, her husband. On the one hand, he is definitely attached to the land of Israel, but on the other, he doesn't. I don't know that he feels the visceral, primal attachment to homeland the way she does.
Yeah. Um, Identity, I think, plays a huge part in this story. So was that also part of your jumping off point, or did that evolve as you evolved the story?
So I think identity for immigrants is always a thing, right? Where
Hmm.
even though we might be away from our homes or our birthplaces for decades, we still feel some kind of a connection. And because of that connection, and because of the fact that we have one foot in one place, one foot in another place, we tend to, I think, question who we are, where we belong. So, identity, whether it's religious identity, cultural identity, whether it comes down to language, music, foods, all of those things we tend to hang on to in a
Hmm.
way, even while we're adopting and assimilating to the new country.
Yeah.
So, I think that sense, that split, is something inherent in the immigrant experience that I wanted to explore. And so that was kind of the inspiration for this. My questions were, what is home? Who
Hmm.
belongs there? Where do I belong? Where does Tamar belong? Um, what does it mean to be displaced, uprooted, exiled? How many forms of exile are there? There's the physical exile, but there's also the emotional exile, the
Hmm.
sense of isolation and alienation that Tamar feels being away from her home. So, all of those things I think I've experienced to some degree because I grew up here and then I went back to Israel for a few years and then came back to the States feeling like, do I belong here or do I belong there or nowhere? Right. So
Hmm.
there's this
Yeah.
um, real question of belonging, rootedness. Those are all the things I think that inspired me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I was mentioning at the beginning, definitely issues of identity and those layers of exile you can hear in what Zeeva was just saying. Where do we belong? Where we belong has a lot to do with our identity. Where we belong has a lot to do with how we feel about exile on so many different levels. So, we're going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about that issue of identity, that sense of identity through the lens of family. With this is definitely a family saga, a family story. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. And one more quick reminder before I forget again that if you would like to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you may do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info. As I said before, you can leave a tip or a donation. You can leave a question or a comment. Happy to engage with those. But again, this helps not only the podcast, but the network as a whole. If you would like to support the podcast in this way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. Again, all support, no matter what form that support takes, is always greatly appreciated. Before the break, Zeeva was talking about her inspiration for the book, The Anatomy of Exile. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Zeeva. And then we explore those issues of identity, not only through the story and some of the cultural background, but also through the lens of Tamar's family and the events that occur, not only with her husband, her sister-in-law, but with her children as well. So talk about writing it from that lens of through the lens of a family.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting. You think of a family as this core unit, right? But in actuality, everyone is an individual in that family. They
Mm-hmm.
don't all think and feel the same thing. And so while Salim is intent on making it in America, he makes it a mission. He works two jobs. He doesn't see his family much. And yet he still misses his sister. A lot of what he's experiencing is through the grief of losing a sister whom he was very, very close to. Almost, even though they were a few years apart and he was the older brother, they have this almost twin-like connection.
Mm-hmm.
Tamar, being away from home, is heart-wrenching. She doesn't know who she is here. She doesn't want to assimilate. She doesn't want to adapt. She keeps herself very much apart from the way that the rest of her family is trying to integrate into American society. She
Yeah.
tries telling them, don't get too close to anyone. We're going home. Because Salim promises her that in 5 years, he's going to make it rich and he's going to take her, he's going to take the family home.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the youngest children, Ari and Rachel, assimilate much more quickly to American society. They learn
Sure.
the language more quickly, they're integrated into school. The older daughter, who's a few years older, Ruby, um, is lonely and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have as many friends, hasn't assimilated. She comes to the United States at the age of 12. And so she feels a sense of disconnect from where she is and who she is, right? A sense of
Yeah.
uprootedness and displacement. And interestingly enough, it's only when she meets Faisal, a Palestinian boy whose family moves in upstairs into the apartment house above from where Tamar and her family live, does she start to feel a sense of connection.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it really doesn't matter that he's Muslim and she's Jewish. What matters is the culture that they share, right?
Mm-hmm.
Salim shares Arabic language with the Mahmoudis, Faisal's parents, um, and foods and a sensibility because he's an Arab Jew
Yeah.
from an Arab land, right? And then comes to Israel. So I think yeah, I think that everybody has their own take on assimilation and integration into a
Mm-hmm.
new society. When I thought about these characters, I wanted to give each one a kind of human life, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to make each one different. And Ari, who's into chess and math, and Rachel, who's into ballet, and each one kind of enters American society in a different kind of way.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, let's talk a little bit more about characters and character development, specifically first for Tamar, who is the protagonist, and we get the story from her point of view. It's not first person, but we still get everything from her point of view.
Absolutely.
What about her do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, she's a mother. She is desperately trying to keep her family together. She's frightened of losing them. She does things that aren't necessarily nice, but we understand why she does it. Hadass dies in a murder suicide.
Hmm.
That is her sister in law.
Yeah.
And when Ruby falls in love with Faisal, she is desperate to end that relationship
Yeah.
because she's terrified that Ruby is going to meet the same fate as her sister-in-law did. I don't want to give too much away. This is already on the jacket, so I'm
Right.
not.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, that is really the driving force of this novel.
Mm-hmm.
The novel is essentially about three love stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for Tamar, she has great love for Salim. It is an intercultural marriage. She is an Ashkenazi Jew. He is an Arab Jew. Their
Mm-hmm.
cultures are very different.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a lot of twisting and contorting that she needs to do in order to keep the marriage intact. And she tries so hard, so very hard, and she makes mistakes. So
Mm-hmm.
I think her humanity and her growth is hopefully something that's really going to resonate with people. Um, I'll never forget uh, the copy editor on this book. When she finished, she sent me a note saying, I was with Tamar all the way. As a mother, I was with Tamar all the way.
Wow.
So I'm hoping that other people will feel that way as well. Not just mothers, but fathers as well. You know, anyone who reads the book kind of understand why she does what she does.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the way she kind of contorts herself to make sure that she's trying to make her marriage work. And we get some of Salim's backstory, but we really meet him in the aftermath of his sister's murder, which affects his entire storyline. So, can you talk a little bit about writing Salim, the complexity of his character, writing him through that lens of grief and anger, and how that shapes the story, really?
Yeah. Um, so he's the patriarch of the family, and he comes from a place where patriarchy rules, right?
Hmm.
Not just not just in Israel, but very much so in Syria, right?
Hmm.
Where
Hmm.
men were the breadwinners of the family. There is no expectation that the women were going to go out and work. I think this, I placed it in this timeline specifically because of those reasons, between 67 and 73, where that was still very much the case.
Hmm.
And Salim was a difficult character to write because at first I made him too brutal. And
Hmm.
I kept getting, like, my editor kept saying, you've got to soften this guy up. We have to be able to relate to him. And
Hmm.
I think that on some level, I felt, well, no. I mean, I understand this character. He's working like a dog. He tries his best for his family, but he can also be cruel and brutal and
Hmm.
tribal. The way
Hmm.
all the male characters in this in this novel are essentially tribal,
Yeah.
right? And and I think that's very much inherent in the Middle East, whether it's Israel or any other country. There is that sense of tribalism. So for Salim, I really had to find his soft spots. I had to find how he loved, the ways that he loved,
Hmm.
to try to bring that out in him. And also, because of the way that he loves, he can be cruel. And so I that complexity, Tamar's sense of intimacy with him, and the sense also that she's an outsider with him, that he lets her in, but not too far.
Hmm.
So there was always this straddling with Salim to show the complexity of this man who grew up in what was known as Hared el Yahud, the Jewish quarter in Damascus,
Hmm.
under dhimmitude, meaning that he was a dhimmi, a second class citizen in a predominantly Muslim Arab land.
Yeah.
And that meant a whole bunch of things for Salim. They called him Yahudi Mal'un, which means a dirty Jew in Arabic, right? In Israel, they call him Aravi Masriach in Hebrew, which basically means a stinking Arab. And so there's, he is really betwixt and between. He's Jewish in an Arab land, he's an Arab in a Jewish land.
Yeah.
Culturally, he's still considered very much Jewish in Israel, but culturally, he comes
Yeah.
from an Arab land.
Yeah.
His first language is Arabic. He needs to learn Hebrew. There are all of those things. And then when he comes to America, because he is working, in a sense, he adapts much more easily than Tamar does.
Mm-hmm.
I felt very much that the children and Salim assimilate much more quickly and easily because they're out in the world. Tamar's life is the domestic sphere. So she is in the house often. She will go to the shops. She will come back. But she's not hopping on a train to go to a job. She's not talking to other people. There are a few people in the building. She's friendly with another immigrant woman. But outside of that, she doesn't have close friends.
Yeah.
She's not connected. And so Salim, in many ways, is much more connected to American society than she is. But he is, after after the death of his sister, angry, grief-stricken, and feels betrayed on many levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And feels that all he has is his family. But as things develop throughout the novel, he begins to lose that sense as well.
Yeah. So, as you can hear, Tamar and Salim have very different experiences when the family moves to New York. They both experience the transition differently, but they both experience a lot of, but they both have those experiences based on their sense of family and how family is important to them. But again, how they react and how those reactions and adjustments affect their storyline and their relationships is very, very different. We're going to go ahead and take our next break of the episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more about the time period and the move to New York and how those really serve to amplify Tamar's sense of isolation and exile. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And then we explore those issues of identity. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Zeeva Bukai. Before the break, she was talking about Salim and Tamar's experiences once they moved to New York and how very different those experiences are and how those experiences affected that move. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Zeeva. And I think the setting that you chose also really helps to amplify Tamar's sense of isolation because it is late 60s, early 70s. She can't just pick up the phone and call someone in Israel. She can't call her mother. There's one line where it says her mother, she gets a letter from her mother twice a month.
It takes that long for an aerogram to get there.
Exactly.
Right? So it's a very different world.
Yeah.
And the one we live in now, which is so connected.
Yeah.
But back then, that sense of isolation, that break with home, I think can be devastating.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful book by Sandra Cisneros called The House on Mango Street, which I'm sure that a lot of people know. And there's a little chapter there about a woman who comes from South America. And there's one line that I think really crystallizes this sense of what women, especially at that time, feel about being torn away from their home and it's about a woman who sits her elbow on the windowsill and looks out at the world. She's inside, and all
Hmm.
she can do is look out because outside is too frightening to enter.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a powerful image. Um, we've got the story that begins the book with Hadass and her
Yeah.
relationship that kind of sparks a lot of the storyline, and then later we get Ruby and her relationship with Faisal, both of them uh kind of Romeo and Juliet. I think a lot of people think of that archetype, but it's not limited to Shakespeare. Are there older archetypes that influenced that storyline, that forbidden love storyline?
Well, I mean, I think there's lots of them. There's Tristan and Isolde. I mean, even David and Bathsheba, right? I mean, she's married to somebody else.
Yeah.
It's actually a pretty awful story because he sends her husband to die in war, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but this idea of forbidden love, and of course, West Side Story. I mean, God knows I
Mhm.
grew up on West Side Story. So, and of course, Romeo and Juliet. The book actually started out from the point of view of Ruby. When I began the book, it was from the point of view of Ruby, and the first scene was the Mahmoudis moving into the building. So you can see how much the book has changed.
Yeah.
As I wrote it, I started I started feeling that Ruby's point of view was too narrow and began writing alternate chapters from the point of view of Tamar. And a friend of mine in my writing group said, I hate to tell you, but Tamar is the much more compelling character. You know, the way she's telling the story feels kind of more essential. You know, it's moving the plot forward.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh boy, I was about 2 years in, and I just,
Oh, gee.
okay,
Yeah.
what am I going to do now? And I really thought about it and began writing from Tamara's point of view. So the Romeo and Juliet trope is something that runs through the novel. But I almost feel that Tamar and Salim are Romeo and Juliet as well because of
Mm.
that intercultural marriage, this sense of loving the other. I think that's a very big theme in the book, the
Yeah.
possibility that you can, right? I think the possibility that you can love someone that your parents, that your society aren't necessarily going to sanction.
Hmm.
They're not going to be okay with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then how do you embrace that? How do you embrace that marriage? You know, and I think it's even harder when you have two different religions, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially people who are considered your enemy,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And so it becomes um, much more complicated, that Romeo and Juliet trope.
Yeah.
Uh, I think Shakespeare, took something that had been around for a long time of where, two households, right? Two very different families. And the children are the ones that want to bring them together, but the parents are too entrenched in their own hatred of each other to see
Yeah.
beyond it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it ends in, for some, it ends in tragedy.
Yeah. And I think we really see that through Tamar's eyes in that um she's seen on the one hand she's seen what it did to Hadass and what her relationship caused. On the other hand, she married Salim against her mother's wishes. Her mother was not for the marriage. So,
Yeah.
but now she's watching her daughter go through something similar. So she has to figure out, okay, well, are we going to continue the generational trauma? Are we going to somehow move past the
Exactly.
generational trauma? And you see that
Yes.
struggle through her story.
Yes, exactly. And the thing about it is that, this was not an easy story to write. I
Hmm.
had to really come to it in the most compassionate, sensitive way that I could for every single character. For me, one of the most tragic characters is not necessarily Hadass, but Daoud, the person that she loves, the person that
Hmm.
she has an affair with for 15 years.
Yeah.
She marries someone else, has children with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
This affair stays constant. She cannot let it go, and he can't let her go.
Yeah.
But he's the one who really loses out. He has no, he doesn't marry in his uh, within his tribe, let's say, right?
Yep. Yep.
And he's kind of stuck betwixt and between. He's literally in the netherworld. There's nothing for, he feels that there's nothing for him outside of Hadass, and yet Hadass, fearing Salim's reaction to this, doesn't ever solidify what she has with Dawood.
And it's interesting that you say that because it's Salim that she worries about, not her own husband. She doesn't want it. It's the reaction of Salim.
Exactly. Because that relationship, Salim sacrificed an awful lot for Hadass.
Yeah.
He stopped going to school. He went out to work. He took care of her in a way that his parents were completely incapable of doing.
Yeah.
So he is both father, brother, and friend to her.
Yeah.
And that is the attachment that they have. So she doesn't want to disappoint him. She can't. She
Yeah.
can't disappoint him. And that's kind of where the tragedy lies, this idea of family secrets. We keep secrets from each other, and that kind of poisons the well. And so there's elements of that in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would imagine there was a lot of research in terms of it being historical fiction, but what can you pinpoint a specific piece of research that you found particularly interesting in the process?
So it's interesting because a lot of this is sort of contemporary history in the sense that it's not 100 years ago.
Right.
There were people that I could talk to. So one of those people that I spoke to was my cousin, Shimon Karmi, who is a professor. He's both a historian. His specialty is Israeli and Middle Eastern history. I actually gave him the book to make sure that everything that I wrote was correct.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few pieces of history that kind of dovetailed with family history. So that sort of wove its way through. An example of so there's two main examples of that in the book. The first is the way that Salim and Hadass come into Israel. And it is the way that my father and my uncles, two of my uncles and my aunt came into Israel. And that is through this program called Aliyat Ha'elef, which in English is Operation 1,000 Children. And this took place in 1945, 1946, although there were Syrian children coming much earlier than that into Israel, as early as the 1920s. If not before. During the Ottoman Empire and during the British Mandate in Palestine, people were allowed to travel from one country through another, and there were actually trains going from Damascus to Jerusalem. So I know that sounds insane today, right?
Right.
I wish it were the same. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's heartbreaking that it is not, because I think we'd be better off.
Mm-hmm.
Would understand each other's cultures much more.
Yeah.
I think also, so that was then. But so Aliyat Ha'elef, the Operation 1,000 Children, was about trying to get 1,000 Syrian children into Israel. My father and his family lived in abject poverty. Not your typical poverty, but poverty as to, no shoes on their feet, 10 children sleeping in one room on mattresses on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Cooking was done outside outside in the courtyard with other families. And oftentimes they lived on pita bread and olives and cheese when they can get it.
Yeah.
So, and people were dying of cholera and typhus, things that could have been even then taken care of with antibiotics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And clean water. So things like that. So my father and his two uncles were smuggled across the Golan Heights. And that is how my father got to Israel at the age of 13. My uncles were 8 and 11.
Oh, wow.
And so that was one aspect of the history that I looked at.
I often find family history fascinating, but this is wow is the best word I can come up with for the story of Zeeva's father's experience. It's no wonder she used that as part of her inspiration, and I'm sure the research was just really fascinating to learn more about that period and about her father's own experience, her uncle's experiences, etc. We're not done with this question. We're going to talk about another aspect of her research that she did when we return from this break. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Zeeva Bukai. Before the break, Zeeva was talking about the family aspect of some of the research that she did for the Anatomy of Exile, and we're going to continue that conversation now.
The other was Kfar Ma'an, the village that I created.
Yeah.
Was actually based on an abandoned Arab village near Tel Aviv. It's actually in Ramat Aviv, where Tel Aviv University is today. And it was called Sheikh Munis. Now, Sheikh Munis was abandoned in March of 1948. The Arab residents there, who had been there probably for a good 200 years, and there were about between 2,000 and 3,000 residents in this village. It was quite large. They grew citrus. They had, citrus groves, and were part of the whole Jaffa orange industry.
Mm-hmm.
The village was abandoned because they feared that they were going to be killed, both in the war, right? The War of Independence is doesn't start until after May 1948, when Israel becomes an independent state,
Mm-hmm.
where the United Nations basically assigns partition. Part of Israel goes to the Palestinians, the other part goes to the Jews. And the Jews accept it, the Palestinians reject the partition. And so Egypt, Syria, Jordan immediately go to war with Israel. So this happens in 48, and the war lasts about a year. The Arab residents who leave in March of 1948 actually leave before the partition plan goes into effect, out of complete terror. They're
Mm-hmm.
absolutely sure they're going to be killed.
Yeah.
In 1949, the nascent Israeli government, needing housing for an influx of people coming in now from Europe, because it's the only place that
Right.
European Jews can actually come into. They're all in DP camps at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them, if they didn't have any place else to go,
Yeah.
which most of them did not, because their families were killed and their homes were taken.
Yeah.
So there is the beginning now of an immigration into Israel from Europe. But there are also all of these people in Israel at the time Yemenite Jews, other Mizrahi Jews, Syrian Jews, Iraqi Jews who are living in Israel for quite a while. So the government places 200 families on this land, on Sheikh Munis, in those houses.
Mm-hmm.
My family were in Sheikh Munis. My father was there. My aunt, her husband, and my cousin were there. I think I was conceived there because my parents lived there when they got married,
Mm-hmm.
then left. But so I felt this connection. When I went to Tel Aviv University, I remember my father saying to me, "That is Sheikh Munis. I live there." And that's when this was quite a long time ago, but that's when we began talking about this place. And so it's kind of always haunted me.
Mm-hmm.
When I lived near the university, not just in the dorms, but took an apartment across the street, there was a citrus grove. And so there it was, kind of evidence of this place that had been abandoned. And then, my family had lived on. And so there was this sense of connection to that place.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of that kind of history, so there was a lot of kind of family oriented history.
Yeah.
My husband fought in the Yom Kippur War, so I learned a lot about the war and kind of, what happened there. But I also read books on the
Sure.
war. I read Avi Shavit's, My Promised Land. I read another book on the Yom Kippur War. I read about the Six-Day War. So there were a lot of, I read a lot of Israeli authors, Palestinian poets, Israeli poets, just to kind of get the flavor and the sense. And of course, talking to my cousin Shimon about my book and making sure that I was getting the history right. And I also gave my book to a Palestinian sensitivity reader
Mm-hmm.
who lives in Haifa. And she read the book through twice. First time all the way through, the second time just the section about the Mahmoudis, which is about another 100 pages. So
Yeah.
I tried very hard to do my due diligence to get it right and also to get at an emotional truth, which for me feels even more important than
Mm-hmm.
the facts. So for me, this doesn't feel like necessarily a historical novel, even though it takes place in history.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a literary novel about a family
Yeah.
and how they navigate the world.
Sure. Yeah. So what do you hope readers might take away from the book?
Possibility and a sense of hope.
Yeah.
That's what I really hope they take away from the book, that the sense that people can grow,
Mm-hmm.
that compassion is the way forward, that without it, we are never going to end this conflict.
Yeah.
That we need to hold spaces of, hold space for people to say, I'm in pain and I know that you're in pain, and to understand that the other is in pain as well. So I'm hoping that they can see Tamar's growth, the way she begins to accept and change and grow more compassionate and grow more into who she is, develop her own identity as a person. Um, that's really what I hope for. I mean, I hope for that there's this sense of possibility that things don't have to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to hate you forever.
Yeah.
I can change that. But I
Yeah.
have to really, but it's really looking inward and being able to change it.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping people can see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we don't get Faisal's mother's point of view. Obviously, it's from Tamar's point of view, but there's one point in the book when she and Tamar are not exactly seeing eye to eye, but she says, "You bring the coffee, or you bring the cake, I'll bring the coffee." Like,
Okay,
and it's kind of
exactly.
what you're saying, possibility and hope. Like we don't know.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
much, but it's a little step for both
It
of them.
is. And I think that those little steps, every single little step forward is a step forward,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
I think it's small things that will hopefully get us there. It's a dark time right now. It is a very, very dark time. And I don't know if it's the best time that my book is out,
yeah,
but I'm hoping that it's exactly the book that people need right now.
yeah,
I really do.
yeah.
Uh,
And I think it's helpful in that it is fiction, but it gives a very good understanding, and it humanizes a lot of different aspects of something that is too often portrayed in sound bites. So hopefully
Absolutely.
people
Yeah,
can read that and start to understand more for themselves as well, both sides.
yeah, I agree. My goal was to make every character a human being in this story. I didn't want anybody to be faceless. I didn't
Mhm.
want anybody to be considered. I didn't want a hero and I didn't want a villain.
Yeah,
I just wanted people,
yeah,
right?
yep,
Because so often in this conflict, people are vilified.
yep,
People are made out to be villains and heroes. And I'm sure that there are villains and heroes, but I didn't want that in my book.
yeah.
I wanted this to be about real people, real families, how families are upended by grief, by displacement, by exile.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. Um, are you working on anything currently?
I am. I'm actually in the process of editing a book that is going to be published in February 2026,
Exciting.
also by the same publisher, Delphinium Books. Um, and it is a very different book than this one. First of all, I mean, it's basically novella length, so it's a short book, but we
Hmm.
decided to publish it on its own, not with a collection. I feel that the themes in the book are big enough to sort of stand alone. And it is about a woman who finds herself in a sanitarium in Jaffa.
Mm.
And she basically relives certain aspects of her life, her marriage, the dissolution of her marriage, the loss of a child, and her own war experiences in Siberia. So in a Siberian gulag. And it is, I hope people will like it. It's written very differently than this book, you know. So yeah, that's basically what I'm working on now. And I
Yeah.
have a collection of short stories that I'm continuously working on and hopefully can finish in the next year and try to get that out as well.
Okay. Thank you. The current work in progress sounds very intense, but also really interesting. So I am interested to read that when it comes out. Maybe Zeeva will even come back to the podcast. Who knows? We're going to take our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about the route that Zeeva took to deciding to write for publication. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my conversation with Zeeva Bukai. Before the break, Zeeva was talking about her current work in progress, which sounds very, very interesting. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Zeeva.
You said you've been writing for 30 years. So with it something you've always wanted to do, I would assume, or did you kind of decide at some point that, you know what, I've been writing for all this time, maybe I should try to write for publication?
So I actually, I think I even as a teen, I began writing as a teenager, but didn't take myself seriously. I wish I had at the time. I just didn't think I was good enough, smart enough, all the things that I felt that a writer needed to be. Artistic enough, talented enough. I had a lot of insecurity around it. And I actually wound up studying theater. I was an actor for a little while. And it was after I had a child that I realized, you know what, theater, children, it doesn't really, it doesn't go well. I mean, I really admire those actresses who do have young children and are able to have a career.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend that time. I didn't want to spend that much time away from my daughter. I couldn't spend that much time away from her. And I began kind of turning towards poetry, and then from poetry to fiction. And that was it. I was just hooked. I couldn't stop writing at that point.
Yeah.
And I had hoped that I would be published. And, very slowly, it was a long haul for me. It took me 10 years to complete this novel, The Anatomy of Exile. There were a lot of stops and starts. I had written another novel beforehand, and, it went as far as an agent and 26 rejections, and then it went into a drawer.
Oof.
So for anybody out there who is writing and who is feeling disheartened, I would say persistence is the thing. You've got to have the grit and the resiliency to be able to just continue working. A lot of people give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Just keep doing it. At some point, it will hit. It might take 20 years, but at some point, it'll happen. Obviously, I've been working and doing other things, bringing up a family. So it's okay. It's okay. It happened when it happened. Over the last 20 years, I wished it had happened sooner. But, I sort of feel that it is, it's kind of fated or destined that this book came out at this time. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
You never know with the timing of things and how that's going to land.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah. So when you take time to read for yourself, not for research necessarily, what do you like to read? Who are your go-to authors and the genres you like?
So I love literary fiction, and that's kind of my favorite. I will read a mystery sometimes, which I enjoy a lot. And my favorite authors are Nicole Krauss, David Grossman, Amos Oz. I love Joan Silber's work. I've read Erica Krauss's collection of short stories, which I think is brilliant. And that's recently, I'm actually in a book club that reads only short stories. So that's been kind of pretty wonderful for me. And I try to read as much as I can all the time. I'm reading Dancing Woman now by Elaine Neal Orr. And here's a little plug. I'm going to be at the Gaithersburg Book Festival next Saturday. And Elaine and I are on a panel to discuss our books. So I'm reading her book now, and I'm really enjoying it. It's beautiful. So yeah, I'm trying to stay current, but at the same time, I go back to a lot of books. There are things that I've read by Nicole Krauss, like Great House, 2 or 3 times because I just feel inspired by her writing. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, I actually like the idea of a book club that reads short stories because sometimes you just don't always read the whole book, but you've probably read at
Right.
least some of the short stories.
Exactly. There's that, and also, I mean, there's the other thing where short stories have a much harder time of getting published. Collections
Mm,
of short stories don't get as much press. You'll have a few of them, like Kelly Link, who writes short stories, very popular. You'll have a few people like that. But overall, people who are publishing their short stories, um, are not getting the attention that, let's say, a novel will get. So this is one way for us to give those people attention. We're reading Laurie Ostlin's new collection for our June meeting. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
yeah, very cool. If people want to know more about you and the book or your other writings, website if you have one, and any social media that you're active on.
So I'm active on Facebook and Instagram. And my website is zeevabukai.com. I love hearing from people, and definitely you can find out all the information about this book, reviews, and reviews, blurbs, all of that, any news and events, and as well as other stories that I've published and other things that I've published are there.
Okay, thank you so much. Zeeva, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure you highlighted or mentioned during our time together?
No, I actually think we pretty much covered everything, but I do want to just kind of impress upon folks that uh, I would love for them to read my book. I would love to hear from them and see what they thought. Um, if you are reading my book or any author's book, please review it, even with
Yeah.
one sentence on Amazon or Goodreads. Um, Only because of the algorithms. This is, your book gets placed in a particular way when you have more ratings and reviews. So
Yeah.
it's really important to kind of move the dial for authors, especially debut authors that nobody
Yeah.
knows about,
Yeah.
and the other thing, I guess, I hope my book touches your heart. I hope it touches the reader's heart. I really do.
Yeah.
I hope they
Yeah.
come away with something that feels hopeful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh,
Not only today, but the time you put in a decade to writing this book, to getting it out in the world. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today to be able to talk about the book and to talk with you. Thanks so much to all of your listeners as well.
Thank you once again to Zeeva for joining me to talk about her debut novel, The Anatomy of Exile. If you are a fan of, as I call it, contemporary historical fiction, but it's historical fiction, but still set in a relatively modern or contemporary time period, this is one you should check out if you're interested in learning more about this region and some of the conflicts that are still, of course, affecting so many people today. Then this might be a book for you to read, especially because you get very Zeeva talked about making all of the characters very human. You get very human perspectives for the people in the book, from the points of view in the book, even though it's only really told from Tamar's point of view. I spoke to another author. We've spoken to him twice, and he's got a historical fiction book also set in Israel, but that's at the turn of the century, more toward the beginning of the 1900s. So if you were at all interested in that conversation, or maybe you've read those books and you want to move forward in time now up to the 60s and the early 70s, you can get a fuller picture of the two different historical settings for this area. And granted, a lot of the book takes place in New York, but you're still going to get a very deep understanding of Israel and identity and exile, etc., and what goes into a lot of the emotional mindset of people who are trying to understand and hoping that things can someday be better in this part of the world. So if you're interested in this book, of course, please do check it out. Your reviews always help, as Zeeva said, so make sure you review those books that you love. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope that you will join me next time. I will be speaking with Sadie Hoagland, who is a returning author. We'll be speaking about her book, Circle of Animals. The main character, the protagonist, Sky, she's having an incredibly hard week. And, trigger warning, this does deal with sexual assault, so please be aware of that if you decide that you are going to either read it or tune into the conversation next week. But Sky experiences her mother going missing and sexual assault in her workplace in the same week, actually in about the same 12 to 15 hours. So it starts off with a lot of emotional and hard things happening in the protagonist's life. So I'm looking forward to having Sadie back on the podcast talking about her new novel, Circle of Animals. I hope that you will join me for that episode. In the meantime, as always, if you are a fan of the podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching the episode on. That helps the algorithm. Something else that really helps the algorithm is, as Zeeva was saying about algorithms and reviews, leaving a review of the podcast helps that algorithm as well, gets that podcast out, this podcast out to more readers, and greatly appreciated. All of your support is greatly appreciated. If you're on social media and want to find the podcast, you can find it on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Come find the podcast, ask me questions, let me know what you've been reading, all of those things. I love hearing from you. I hope you're having a great week. I hope it's off to a good start and that you've got some good stuff going on as you head through the work week and toward the weekend. But as always, my main hope for you is that whatever the week is throwing at you, it also gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to